The Renaissance Podcast with Matt Folger and Evan Spadoni. In this week's podcast, we cover ISIS, Iraq, Kazakhstan, Nazarbayev, the Eurasian Customs Union, Russia, fracking, public credit, the future of state capitalism, NATO, China and Tibet relations, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, China-Australia trade relations, India, infrastructure, the Tea Party, quantitative easing, the finance oligarchy versus the industrial oligarchy, battle taking shape in terms of the renewal for the Export-Import Bank, James Baker III, and Republicans in the immigration issue. We were going to dive into our 1830s, covering the rise and fall of the Whig Party, but there's just so much news this week that we're going to postpone that until next episode and cover all this stuff going on. It's quite a bit of it.
And really what's been dominating the headlines from what I see is the ISIS from Iraq almost taking Baghdad. I saw a map today in the New York Times where he was right next to Baghdad. And what I'm seeing from sort of the mainstream stuff is that they're raising the militia and hoping that they can stop this stuff, but everything I see is that they're just going to, I think they're going to take Iraq, or at least
the capital.
Yeah, do some serious, I think it's far from over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Let's see. What do you got? You got lots of stuff.
Front page of Drudge. Islamic law spreads in Iraq. Yeah, that's what you get when you get these radical Sunnis. They're these terrible, awful, backward barbarians.
I saw a map today of what ISIS wants to include in its territory, and it's from pretty much Morocco to Indonesia. I'm like, man, aim high, huh?
Yeah, good for you.
Shoot for the stars. The entire Islamic world will be brought under Sharia law and everything, according to them. Kazakhstan, Economist article here saying the bear on the doorstep and why Kazakhstan fears its hug. Russia-Kazakhstan relations look rock solid. On May 29th, Nazarbayev, Kazakhstan's president, played genial host in Astana, his futuristic capital, to Russia's president Vladimir Putin. Lukashenko of Belarus was also on hand to sign a pact creating the Eurasian Economic Union, the EEU, a free trade group soon to open to other former Soviet states, starting with Armenia and Kyrgyzstan. Yet cracks have emerged in the Union even before it starts functioning next January. Mr. Putin plainly views it as a way to project Russian power. He has seen Ukraine as a linchpin of the EEU, the Eurasian Customs Union. Kiev's geopolitical lunge towards the West has made him even more zealous in his post-Soviet integration project. Some neighbors, including Nazarbayev, are alarmed. The Kazakh leader is uncomfortably aware that Ukraine paid a high price for choosing West over East. The Kremlin's bellicose reaction shocked him. Incendiary claims by Russian nationalists to part of southern Siberia, i.e. northern Kazakhstan, disavowed by Moscow but only languidly, have further jangled nerves. So, Nazarbayev of Kazakhstan was so incredibly distraught by this action that on June 6th, later, than what they're citing here. He was in Turkey advertising for the Eurasian Customs Union and saying, hey, you Turks should join this new economic free trade zone that we're creating. Yeah. So their analysis of showing that Nazarbayev of Kazakhstan is somehow wary or suspect of Russia is completely baseless. I looked all over there for any headline or anything Nazarbayev was saying that was like wary of Putin, and there's nothing there. So psychoanalysis, where they're saying, "Oh, Nazarbayev is alarmed.
Speculation.
He must have jangled nerves." It's just implying that they're his shrink, and they just know what's going on with this guy, even though.
Well, it's just sort of the standard Russian, anti-Russian rhetoric you get out of pieces like The Economist.
And totally baseless too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really fantastic. Screw reality. We're just going to write our own narrative that has nothing to do with anything, based on no information. If Nazarbayev was scared of Russia, even though they used to be part of the same country for hundreds of years. I mean, they were part of the USSR. They were, I'm sure, within the Russian Federation for, hundreds of years?
Russian Empire as well.
Yeah, exactly. So these people have lived under the same state before. So they're trying to gin up discontent between Kazakhstan and Russia, because you look clearly on a map, and access to getting Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan into the customs union has to go through Kazakhstan. What they're trying to create here is they're saying that Nazarbayev, he's almost 74 years old. He's been in the executive leadership of that country for 20 years. And hinting here with the last paragraph, the authoritarian president, meaning Nazarbayev, not one to heed those that disagree with him, shrugs this off. But Nazarbayev turns 74 next month and cannot, despite appearances, rule forever. Dealing with the consequence of Kazakhstan's new bond with Russia will be one of the hardest tasks facing whoever eventually succeeds him. And when they're talking about shrugging off, Nazarbayev is shrugging off protesters that are wearing surgical masks over their mouth to avoid catching the virus of imperialism, according to Russian imperialism is what they're talking about. And they're holding a protest they're putting underwear on their head in protest at the ludicrous regulation regarding underwear imposed by the customs union that preceded the EU. If they can find 5 protesters protesting against the customs union, they can say here's a microphone, what do you think? And then they're looking to create color revolution down the road in Kazakhstan. Obviously, it's not going to happen under Nazarbayev's watch. Look at Ukraine on the map, right? Getting access into the lower former Soviet states of Southern Europe and the Slavic areas of Yugoslavia and old Bulgaria and Romania and all that, it has to go through Ukraine, right? So having turmoil and chaos and civil war in Ukraine prevents Russia from extending its Eurasian Customs Union in that direction, as well as Kazakhstan would be the other road that they could cut off from getting into Central Asia again. Mm-hmm. So totally made up, and they're just trying to foment any kind of thing. I mean, the Western elites are so captured by their own ability to warp the truth that we'll see with other articles, that it's almost like all they need to do is just to say this animosity exists between Kazakhstan and Russia for the Western elites to just go along with it. It's really quite remarkable.
It seems really ineffectual, though. I mean, all this
for
sort of propaganda that you get
right outside the Beltway, totally. No one's, very few people are buying it. But Shields and Brooks or something like that. They're just heart repeating these talking points. So next economist article, Unblinking Putin. The West should impose fresh sanctions to deter more Russian meddling in eastern Ukraine. The plan to alienate Russia is build tons of LNG terminals. Somehow that we're going to be able to outcompete Russian gas that they can bring in through pipelines by having it fracked here in the United States, pipeline to a coastal port, liquefied, put on a ship, shipped across the ocean, arrived at a place, go, deliquefy it, go back through pipelines, and somehow beat them on price. That's just totally infeasible, right? That they could possibly deprive them of this market to which they're directly next to. How could we possibly undercut them in price? If you just look at cost of production, their costs are immensely lower, and so with higher cost of production with fracking and liquefaction and shipping, it's just impossible. But this is somehow the West's strategy to try to go after Russia. Basically, we're just dumping more money into a bottomless pit. And what we're seeing is when Russia backs off or does not, backing off their own border, or recognizing the election, that kind of action, the kind of rapprochement, I don't know what would you call it. The response of the West is more aggression.
Yeah, if the Russia tries to play ball, even like make concessions, it's always I don't see the West as having any sort of intentions of building up Ukraine.
Oh yeah, definitely not. They don't want to build up Ukraine at all. They want it as chaotic as possible and as looted as possible. Steal what they can and make sure it's just this chaotic whirlwind, so they can't extend into that area. A huge part of Ukraine depriving them of the second biggest economy, the would-be Eurasian Customs Union, is huge. They have 44 million people. They got really rich soil. They have an industrial base in the east. Having it chaotic, having all this is part of the plan, right? Russia and Ukraine united with these other countries would make a much more formidable,
but I think
counterweight.
Yeah, I agree absolutely. That, but the game that I see Russia playing is sort of giving the West enough rope to hang itself, because their policies are going to fail. Once they do the shock therapy, IMF shock therapy, the current Ukrainian government is going to collapse.
It would be amazing to see how it could live, especially when these people have all been under the beginnings of shock therapy, like during the breakup of the Soviet Union. So they know outside imposed austerity plans and what they do, and that's still fresh in the cultural zeitgeist. People are still alive that went through that, obviously. So like, just from this article, the simple point of this article from The Economist is you can't placate the imperialists. You can't surrender to them. There's no
I don't think
amount of servitude that they'll accept. It's just more.
It's like the Romans.
Never enough.
They're going to get it out of your hide one way or the other.
Look at the fascist protesters of Ukraine when the government of Yanukovych made concessions. Mm-hmm. They're like, oh, you're weak. You're making concessions. Now I want more concessions, right? Because you're weak enough to concede something. Then I want more, right? So you're dealing with not some kind of fair player. You're dealing with the mentality of a bully and a looting interest. So what are those two articles about, right? We're seeing the resurgence of a Russian-led economic bloc to provide economic development for the Eurasian countries and Central Asian countries, which otherwise is not forthcoming. Mm-hmm. And these countries are the populations when they vote. Like for example, Moldova, the country between Romania and Ukraine, they have like a 90% of the population once into the Eurasian Customs Union, because they remember being part of Soviet Russia, and it was way better than what they got after that. Being in the larger family of the USSR, we had better economic development, better standard of living. So if you look at that, like that offer now being kind of regenerated compared to IMF austerity or getting in the EU and just being totally ground down into a fine powder with their austerity. So this whole project, it bodes well for the world because it provides a counterweight to the EU and to the IMF, and we need counterweights because this, and you're seeing the emergence of this because during the 2000s or something like that, you could get away with having a kind of just a more passive involvement with these other countries because we were not in a global economic depression, so things could kind of coast along. But the continued economic global depression is creating these counterweights now. Like these countries have to find some way to get out of the dollar system because it's destroying everybody. Yeah, destroying them, destroying everyone. So that's what's going on here in the background. Leviathan is capitalist. Here's a kind of editorial article in The Economist. It is now 25 years since Francis Fukuyama published The End of History and ignited a firestorm of debate. Today there are many reasons for thinking that he was wrong about the universal triumph of liberalism and markets from democracy. What?
Well, if it was done correctly, if it wasn't done on the loot and pillage model that we got, if there was a sort of a global New Deal that could have happened after the collapse of the USSR.
Yeah, and that's the point. Like the model of what they say when they mean liberalism at markets is the system of pillaging, usury, speculation, bubble economics. Because actual human progress and increased industrialization is all contingent upon state policy. Mm-hmm. Like, and if you have liberalization, which just opens it up to the free market, quote unquote, then you get what you expect. Cartels, monopolies, usury, declining standards of living, because the money power is basically unshackled from its confines, keeping it tied.
Somewhat reasonable.
It's like steam pressure or a pressure valve or something like that. Like you can turn it into a servant to do functional things, But if you just let it go wherever it wants, then it's totally not useful and destructive even. So to continue, from democracy's failure in the Middle East to the revival of religious fundamentalism, they're just showing that these things have risen and to challenge the triumph of liberalism and markets. Neoliberalism is basically classical economic liberalism, which is bankers should run the society, is basically what they're referring to. But one of the most surprising reasons is the continuing power of the state as an economic actor. Far from retiring from the business battlefield in 1989, collapse of the Soviet Union, the state merely regrouped for another advance. So they are saying here, we thought the state had been defeated, basically. We lived in this kind of semi-feudal market economy where the transnational corporations and the major monopolistic cartel of banks run the global world. And they thought that was the condition, but flabbergasted to find it's not. Survey the battlefield today, and you can see state capitalism almost everywhere. In China, companies in which the state is a majority shareholder account for 60% of stock market capitalization. In Russia and Brazil, companies in which the state is either a majority or a significant minority stake account for 30 to 40% of the capitalization of the markets. Even in such bastions of economic orthodoxy as Sweden and the Netherlands, state-owned enterprises account for 5% of market capitalization. Chinese and Russian governments show little sign of wanting to surrender control of the commanding heights of the economy. Privatization seems to have ground to a halt in Brazil and India.
Well, because they see the results of it in the United States. When you get privatization, you don't get investment on national products, infrastructure products that drive the economy, that are the real engines, the heavy lifting engines of the economy. Instead, we have bankers collateralizing debt obligations and flipping houses and just this nonsense economy of don't create anything service oriented. McDonald's, Walmart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's what's most expedient, right?
Yeah,
there's no future vision or assessment to lift humanity up. It's just I can make a quick buck. It's the Peter Schiff model. I can make a quick buck flipping this house or crushing wages in this area with this model of business. I'm going to do it. Mm-hmm. And so, these other states are organized enough in resistance to that mentality and to that global force that is sweeping the planet to say we don't want this for our people. And they're organized enough to resist it. They have enough patriotic culture, political institutions that are strong enough to resist that temptation, which is always there. Immediate profits, immediate riches, immediate aggrandizement, things like that. To continue, what should one make of the revival of state capitalism? Opinions vary wildly. Some praise it as a superior form of capitalism, while others treat it as a mere way station on the road to proper capitalism. One of its most ardent proponents, Vladimir Putin of Russia, somehow keeps a straight face when claiming that there is no state capitalism in his country. They're just always the jabs, right? Just endless.
Gotta take your shots.
Just between every word, Reinventing State Capitalism, a new book by Aldo Musacco of Harvard Business School and another guy. They shed fresh light on the question. It notes that the old model of Leviathan as entrepreneur, in which the state-owned companies ran companies outright and ran them by ministerial diktat, was largely swept aside by the privatization wave of the 1980s and 1990s. When governments realized that they could make money out of their companies rather than constantly bailing them out. It's just bloated jargon here. But instead of swimming off into the blue ocean, Leviathan reappeared in three disguises: as majority or minority shareholder and as an indirect investor. So, if you're a libertarian, just notice that you're using the same terminology and language that, the billionaires and millionaires that read The Economist are, right? To refer as, the state as Leviathan. Remember, Hobbesian conceptions of state. You share these exact same models of how to think about things. They're also the way that Wall Street itself thinks about things in the city of London. Mm-hmm. So, who are you serving, ultimately? That should be your question. Anyway, so then they're like, oh, well, Fukuyama was he was just early. He was premature. State capitalism, worldwide oligarchy, universal free trade is, what we're still going there, and we intend on arriving there. Another note on the increased aggression of the British. They are talking about moving NATO into Finland and moving NATO into Sweden.
Jesus, Finland? So dangerous.
Yeah, this is especially true in Finland, once part of the Russian Empire. Alexander Stubb, who was about to take over as prime minister, made clear his wish. Minister of Finland, made clear his wish to push for NATO membership with the aim of maximizing Finland's national security. Wow, that's about as backwards as you could possibly get. So it's under this lens that the Russians have backed off against even doing anything even marginal on the borders, moving the troops back from the borders, even though that they're like shooting missiles into the Russian border. Remember the border station in the last week got rocketed. The Russian border agents. Incredibly dangerous. They're trying to goad Russia into something so they can create a hardened NATO alliance, and NATO can further solidify its base of support. So anyway, to continue, he, meaning Alexander Stubb, this Finnish prime minister, was elected this week as leader of the conservative Kokoomus party, succeeding some other person with a Finnish name, so I can't pronounce it, who is moving to the European Commission. Nothing will happen immediately, as the current 5-party coalition excludes moves towards NATO. Well, that's good. So they have a 5-party coalition government. That's a huge coalition, right? So hopefully, if they try to move into NATO, enough of those parts of the coalition will break away, making that government untenable and unable to join NATO. Because this is incredibly dangerous stuff, as Russia says. To continue, Russia is snarling. Sergei Markov, a senior political advisor to Mr. Putin, said Finland risked triggering a third world war. Anti-Semitism started World War II. Russophobia can start a third world war. Finland is one of the most Russophobic countries in Europe after Sweden, Poland, and the Baltic countries. And a country that gave rise to the term Finlandization, an enforced neutering of foreign policy by the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Mr. Stubb is going further than his predecessors. Public opinion is ambiguous. Polls find most Finns against joining the alliance.
Yeah.
But they would agree if the country's leaders advocated it. That's just added on post facto. Anyway, so the Finnish people are against it. For the position of the West, if they can make the Finnish people the suicide kamikaze puppets against Russia, who knows where that will end. But you see that the mentality of the British here,
always expand, always push up right up to the edge.
Yeah, and potentially over it. They've been instrumental in starting both First and Second World War. Yeah. First with their political alignment system encircling Germany in World War I,
which is what they're trying to do right now with Russia.
With Russia,
circle Russia.
Yeah, and then the Second World War by financing Hitler with Wall Street, of course. So, as a torpedo to strike against the Soviet Union, primarily. The British, they'll never learn. They can't learn. You're dealing with an irrational force. It's not. It's just like a slime mold or something like that, like a fungus. It just has to expand, be aggressive, continue to dominate, continue to extract the world economy, and it only gets stopped when we put a stop to it. Mm-hmm. Like these external forces they can do what they can do, but obviously dismantling NATO requires the people of the United States and the people of Europe to first reassert their economic sovereignty by
that'll fix it.
Recapturing the ECB and turning the European Central Bank over to the commons for developing Europe rather than maintaining derivatives bubbles. And then once they do that, getting out of NATO will just be kind of a formality at that point. To move on to China, China is building high-speed rail everywhere. And they're building high-speed rail into the Far East, into Tibet, into Xinjiang province, the upper northwest province. So they're building, listen to this, at the cost of $4 billion, tracks were built across 340 miles of permafrost, reaching an altitude of 16,000 feet, the highest railway in the world. This September, the extension of the line will open from Lhasa, planning on further knitting Tibet into the rest of China. So, that's incredibly cheap. I just like that number. For $4 billion, you can get 340 miles of high-speed rail.
That's cheap.
That's a bargain.
Absolutely.
So I'm launching my Billionaires to Bridges program, where we can take a billionaire, like a Pete Peterson or the Koch brothers, and by the magic of taxation, we can transform them into 100 miles of modern maglev track.
Sure.
Man, think how many worthless billionaires we have. Just sucking all our labor power out of us, stealing all our assets. If we could just turn these people into maglev, that would be awesome.
A boon for civilization.
Yeah, that'd be huge. Get rid of the worthless billionaires, get a 21st century maglev system. 2 more railways from Xingzi to the Nepalese and Indian borders at Nilam and Bromo are also planned, to the alarm of the Indian government, which announced plans to fortify 54 new border posts in the northeastern state of China that invaded. So anyway, there's border contention. We'll see what this Modi of India does, how legit he is, how not legit he is. I don't know.
Yeah, well, India, if he is legit, if he does do rural electrification for India, they're going to become a huge powerhouse.
Yeah.
If you start to harness that population, educate them, give them access to the internet, and then build some legit infrastructure around it, they're going to have a really strong country.
Yeah.
Space program.
That's a lot of people to make productive. In Xinjiang, in the far northwest, where many people of the ethnic Uyghur minority chafe at rule from Beijing, building transport links is also seen as a way to increase national security. Lavish spending on infrastructure by China reflects the central government's...
Necessary. Let's look at that. The wording they use.
Yeah.
Lavish.
Lavish. Building a modern rail system through the rural land of their country is lavish. As if this stuff won't return an investment.
1,000 times over.
Lavish spending on infrastructure reflects the central government's determination to use economic development to pacify restive Western regions. Yeah.
Yeah, that'll work.
That does it.
That will work every time.
How about pacifying the Tea Party and the gun-toting lunatics of this country?
Give them jobs.
Ready? Yeah.
Prevailing wages on.
Yeah, they'll be like,
programs.
they'll be like, huh, wow. They're like, wait a minute, this whole civilization thing is pretty cool, actually. I don't want to go dig a hole in my backyard and
build a moat.
Wait for the apocalypse.
Yeah.
The sheer scale of such initiatives in Xinjiang and Tibet have its costs. The people pushing these policies can't really see the smaller issues of preserving culture and the environment, says Robert Barnett, a professor of modern Tibetan studies at Columbia University. It's like using a bulldozer to herd mice, he says.
Well, work.
So they're anti-development. It's always, if you build this modern rail system, you're going to corrupt the culture of this area. Meanwhile, they're getting a rising standard of living, access to health care that they've never had before, electricity, because of the Chinese government. Because the Chinese government knows, as well as, in the domestic, more heartland of China, as well as in the western territories of China, that their legitimacy is based on economic growth. So it's going to turn this area of Tibet into a huge mining area, and by 2020 the aim is to complete several other major rail routes connecting Tibet with its neighboring provinces, all the surrounding provinces. It will cost more than $20 billion, but they're going to turn it into a giant natural resource, copper, iron ore, all kinds of stuff. Right now they're doing importing a lot of that from other countries, and they have this huge resource of Tibet for mining, and the people there could be put into the mining industry, and be made productive too. Going from rural peasant life to being a miner is an improvement. The party values Tibet's mineral reserves at 600 billion won. They're saying it's going to produce 116 million pounds of copper, this one mine, 200,000 ounces of gold, and 2.4 million ounces of silver annually. Right, so huge resource thing that's already in their territory. So just developing this and getting this into the economic landscape is, hugely beneficial. It's not lavish spending, like ordering a second dessert at a fancy restaurant or something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, the annual income of even those in the poorest rural regions of Tibet is rising. So that's the policy of China. What do we have?
Rising standard of living
Yep.
for poor peasants. They're bringing people out of peasantry.
Yeah. And it's hard to create separatist movements and discontentment when you're saying, hey, what am I being offered here, right?
I went from not having electricity to having electricity.
By this government that I'm being told by the West is my worst enemy and destroying my culture and whatever.
I got a surgery, and it worked, and I feel better. My shoulder hurt. Feels great.
Anyway, economic. So to continue with the China front, here's a thing from the Wall Street Journal. Economic realities put Australia in a corner. So really interesting politics coming out of Australia. I don't pay too much attention to Australia usually, but here's an interesting story. Not surprisingly, perhaps, those in Australia have little time for those who see China as a threat. The country's former Prime Minister, Malcolm Fraser, goes further. In a recently published book, quote, dangerous allies, Mr. Fraser recommends breaking Australia's defense alliance with the U.S., tossing out the U.S. Marine contingent in Darwin, and closing down the U.S. electronic spy base in Pine Gap. While Mr. Fraser was a strong proponent of the alliance while he was in the government from 1975 to 1983, he now writes that it risks dragging Australia into an American war with China. If the U.S. lost, it could withdraw from the region. Australia would have nowhere to go, ending up as the defeated ally of a defeated superpower. Rising tensions between the U.S. and China, triggered by China's assertive approach to territorial disputes, is creating a new bout of anxiety in Australia, raising fresh questions about the wisdom of the country playing the role of America's deputy sheriff in the region. That role was underlined this week when a top U.S. Marine Pacific commander urged Australia to consider taking a more visible policy role. Yeah, so you just see the counter pressure, right? Like, economically, Australia is completely tied into China, as they cover here. Despite cooling growth in China, which has hurt the price of iron ore as well as coal, no other country comes as close in its influence on Australia's economic prospects. And no country in the region is more dependent on exporting to China than Australia. Its Chinese export accounted for 36.1% of its total in 2013. So over a third of Australia's export economy goes to China. And so when they're being basically cajoled, carrot and sticked, trying to be, weaned away from that ally in favor of entangling alliances, military aggression, military bases, setting up for a new world war, they're like, hey, this doesn't look like that great of a prospect.
We don't want any part of this.
Anyway, right now, the appetite for Australia's minerals won't end soon. Taking account this economic slowing in China, they'll need tons of iron ore to build its urban skyscrapers, subways, rail systems. All this makes Australia deeply uncomfortable when America and China are at odds. Yeah. Even with all this
it makes me uncomfortable.
Right. Yeah, and saying it's not wavering in its support for America. They just want neutral relations.
Yeah.
They just want to trade with China. They want to trade with the United States. They're like, what do we have?
I agree with that. I think there should be, a pact between China, Australia, and the United States.
We should be doing stuff that's beneficial for all. But
Australia's a place to use some high-speed rail.
And water projects for
water project development, lots of farmland that you could cultivate.
They need water projects just every which way. That they're saying, okay, what can we do? Because right now, another thing to cover with this is the battle lines and the allegiance system is not hard line as they would like it. Like if you see World War I coming into focus, you got to get the battle lines, the alliance systems are like really firmly in place before you're going to be able to antagonize these other countries. And so they're trying to create this by mostly threats and mostly fear-mongering because we don't have anything else to really offer them.
We don't have an economy.
We don't have we don't have an industrial economy anymore, so it's not like we can lure them over to our big industrial barons. All we have is Lloyd Blankfein selling derivatives contracts.
Do you want some natural gas we fracked? You got that.
They're and we're trying to liquefy it and ship it over to you. Meanwhile, that will be made irrelevant by nuclear power technology upshifts pretty soon, which is even more hysterically funny. So, I think a lot of comparisons have been put out there of we're in 1914, August is right around the corner. I don't really see that. We're in 1904 or something like that. We're still in a really liberalized world economy that they can't really do much about China. Can't do this without this closing these trade pacts, freezing China out of trade relations with its neighbors, Trans-Pacific Partnership style, and then getting all these countries to take the bait on the hysteria between the rising tensions and the fight over the those petty islands and South Japan.
Yeah,
and saying, look at that, that's aggressive China. Oh, meanwhile, Russia's aggressive because of Crimea. Just this fantastic thesis that China and Russia are the biggest aggressors and warmongers on the planet. So without these countries really grabbing onto this, you're not going to have a successful economic or actual warfare with China. To cover central bank rates, QE, just briefly, quantitative easing is here to stay, obviously.
How many articles like that have we read over the last 4 years?
Lots, tons. And the thing
Tapering off.
Here they're saying though too that the backlash seems to be getting kind of bigger. So here, now America's Federal Reserve, which, like the Bank of England, has kept rates near zero for more than 5 years, has signaled its intention to keep them there until the rest of the year. But it too faces ever louder calls, including from some of its own officials, to abandon that pledge. So you have like a monkey trap or like a raccoon trap with QE, right? They can't stop keeping down interest rates and floating the giant derivatives bubble, because if they do, with these other powers and trading blocks that are out there, could be the end of their whole neoliberal worldwide dominance.
I think it would be.
Yeah, but the continued to continue it also is
bailing water. That's all you're really doing, and you can't bail it fast enough to do it. You could fix the hole, you could do that, but that would change the power structure. They simply, philosophically, I feel, are just unable to build anything of use. It seems utterly, they just feel completely incompetent if they cannot see the value in building a real economy because they can asset strip faster, or at least they used to be able to. And so they're stuck in this model where they can't not get off of this, the system that they're on, where they get enough money to keep their lifestyle going through QE, but their power is just eroding.
Yeah,
because they don't have any. It's all fake. It's all flim flam.
Yeah, totally. And they're bailing water, like Evan said, but it's like the boat is still sinking, and the continued QE does have costs even to them. I think, like they're starting to realize both these avenues are untenable, and you have voices coming out against both. Because the continued hot money just expansion, countries are distancing themselves from it as the system continues to just kind of thermodynamically degenerate. Like it's not, there's no more loot to be had. I don't know. It's interesting because usually the QE must, the stories, the archetype of the stories of the QE must continue forever into infinity. Usually just are kind of like cut and dry. But this one's saying that the backlash is getting bigger. And bigger names are coming out and saying, "Hey, like this needs to."
What's their alternative?
They don't have one, but right,
of course.
Just like the inevitability of QE is like now kind of under question. Here's a Wall Street Journal article. Wall Street Journal is basically done with Obama. They're pretty tired of him.
Really?
Yeah, but it's they're saying that they're so disappointed because Obama's foreign policy decision.
Yeah, of course, they want war.
To not obey the red line that he created.
What a dumb idea, but. So that's their...
In aggression we trust is basically their motto,
Yeah.
So we should have punished Bashar al-Assad by bombing the shit out of his people. Somehow that would punish him for launching a chemical weapons attack that he didn't actually even do.
Well
documented fact now. It's...
MIT came out with a study
yeah.
using math to say that no way that this...
Yeah, and then who was the guy? Seymour Hersh.
That's right, absolutely.
So anyway, the world is slipping from Obama's control. And it's amazing sophistry. They're saying, people don't like Obama's handling of foreign policy. Mr. Obama's approval rating is 41%, and his handling of foreign policy approval rating is 37%. Even though that would be like, his foreign policy would be at 10%, had we been involved in a major regional war. So a lot of this stuff's how you structure these questions, right? Because Obama did not go for war. In Syria, on the line, definitely, but
certainly
we're not in a war right now with Syria, the direct bombing campaign and ground troops. And so they warp a poll to say, his foreign policy supports at 37%, but meanwhile, like we didn't get the war we wanted. So is this 37% of Wall Street Journal readers or what? I don't know. There's Russian tanks ended up in Ukraine, even though that's not even true. And this Al Qaeda group. They'd never heard of, took over Iraq in 2 days. The world is slipping beyond our control.
They've never heard of ISIS?
Or interest, yeah. Well,
they're not following
they literally, the next sentence after saying we should have bombed Assad, they're saying, what happened? Like, now Iraq's controlled by ISIS. Which would be, like, they would control a lot more than even just northern Iraq had we bombed Assad, which was in the process of, grinding up the forces of ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Free Syrian Army, the terrorist brigades. Reality doesn't matter to these people, right? It's, we should bomb Assad, but now, look at that. The group he was fighting against is now taking over Iraq. So it's just total Orwellian We've always been at war with East Asia. We've never been at war with East Asia kind of stuff. Anyway, they also trump up the IRS Tea Party audit story. He's saying it isn't Watergate, it's worse than Watergate. Total nonsense. All these PACs who want their tax exempt status, it's just a big nothing, a hullabaloo about nothing. So that's Wall Street Journal opinion piece. Just, we're not able to loot and rape the population as much as we'd like, so
I read a
bad Obama.
New York Times opinion piece today about carbon taxing and how now's the time, and this Wall Street dude was talking about how carbon tax is the way to go, and it's so progressive. It's a moral imperative. It's absolute nonsense.
It is so progressive.
Well, they talk about how carbon fuels are the big issue without talking about investment in other fuels like nuclear power.
Yeah,
that would change the game. If you're trying to get rid of carbon, that's the way you do it.
Well, fracking's okay because fracking keeps all the existing oil companies, all the existing assets, and who owns the mineral rights of these lands and what's under them. Basically, when you own mineral rights to some area, you own it from that area all the way to the center of the earth. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So if fracking is down, way further than you had access to before, you just basically got a windfall, right? It's just this mineral rights under this land are now worth way more because all these minerals lower. Anyway, some really interesting articles here from the opinion piece of the Wall Street Journal, one by Rupert Murdoch. This one's pretty good.
Is it written in crayon because he owns the paper? He just write however he wants?
He's just, it's actually in a series of pictographs of interpretive dance by Rupert Murdoch. Murdoch, yeah. So, by Rupert Murdoch. Immigration reform can't wait is the name of the article.
Yep, here we go. Here's what the Republican Party.
Yeah. Quote, when I learned that House Majority Leader Eric Cantor had lost his Republican primary, my heart sank.
And my wallet. Hey, how's it going?
Not simply because I think he's an intelligent and talented member of Congress, or because I worry about the future of the Republican Party. So it's saying, like others who want comprehensive immigration reform, I worried that Mr. Cantor's loss would be misconstrued and make Congress reluctant to tackle this urgent need. That would be the wrong lesson and an undesirable national consequence of this single local election result. We need to give those individuals who are already here, after they have passed checks to ensure that they are not dangerous criminals, a path to citizenship so they can pay their full taxes, be counted, and become more productive members of our own community.
Unlike me, he doesn't pay taxes.
Yeah, of course. So the big business, the Fortune 500s, want immigration reform desperately.
Yeah.
And the Tea Party wing and the populist wing doesn't want immigration reform, and this is just impossible. Next, we need to do away with the cap on H-1B visas, which is arbitrary and results in U.S. companies struggling to find high-skilled workers they need to continue growing. Right, because growing our own high-skilled workers here is just totally impossible. Mm-hmm. You'd actually have to further education, further investing in your population, and they don't want to do that. We already know that most of the applications for these visas are for computer programmers and engineers, where there's a shortage of qualified American candidates. Well, what happened? Why is there a shortage? Oh, that's right, because we have $1.2 trillion of student loan debt.
Yeah.
But we are held back by the objections of the richly funded labor unions.
Boo! Get him, Rupert.
Yeah, good old Rupert.
Get those unions
to task.
Boo!
That mistakenly believe that if we keep innovation out of America, somehow nothing will change. Anyway, so, false choice. If you're against, endless immigration, then therefore you hate development. Probably hate minorities, according to Rupert Murdoch. Democratic societies don't advance when our elected officials act like seat warmers. We need reform. We need legislation now. That's Rupert Murdoch. And he knows that what he sees here and what, the more establishment-minded, Fortune 500 business class, golf club Republicans see here with the defeat of Eric Cantor and Dave Brat, that this is impossible. You're not going to get any kind of comprehensive immigration reform definitely for the next 2.5 years, I would say.
Well, the real, rank and file of their party is against this stuff.
The leadership is totally for it, but the leadership is, does whatever Wall Street wants. So, the right-wing populism of this is anti-immigrant, and, for better or for worse, some of the stuff, kind of makes sense. If you're against endlessly expanding H-1B visas, it causes a brain drain in these other countries, but it also doesn't require the elites of this country to invest anything in our own people.
Yeah, I don't mind the immigration at all. I would just like some domestic investment as well. I think it's a great boon for America that people want to come here and work. But I think there should be like a $15 minimum wage that they all can come here and enjoy. Because really what they're used to is drive down costs of labor.
Yeah. Well, that's how they want to keep it. It's not like immigration during the 19th century or something like that, where it's just like flood the migrants in, just exploding economic growth, exploding population growth, exploding infrastructure.
Well, it could be like that.
Industry. It could be, right? But the Fortune 500's angle on this is, of course, it's all about depressing wages.
Sure.
That's the whole angle and why it's pushed. So in that context, the Tea Party actually becomes kind of like a weird, useful institution in a strange way, I think. Because, in that context, if you're going to have just tons of people flooding here, low wage labor and high skilled labor, fixed context of work, meager job prospects, that's going to drive down wages. So, if it was during a New Deal system in which unemployment rate was like 1%, then that wouldn't have that kind of effect as much. So it's strange bedfellows for sure.
I think we can be able to use this labor, one, to organize, and two, to develop the country. I think this is going to turn into a term for it, but it's going to boomerang on the Fortune 500 elites.
Yeah, and the Dave Brat voters aren't voting really on some kind of way in which
they can't get out of it.
Well, in the immigration system, they're already against the way the country already looks.
Mm-hmm.
They're against the present demographic situation anyway. So future immigration is just kind of a re-couched,
screaming at the rain.
Yeah, and racist kind of overtones. Typically, it doesn't really, because these same Dave Brat voters, right? They're against the trade unions, which would historically, that you had to prove immigration status and stuff like that to work, and they were keen. The position of the union was keen on keeping it that way because it was in their position and best interest to not be ran out on coolie labor, scab labor, right? So it's just a chaotic situation really politically, where all these people don't know their own best interests, and none of them are right because they don't have a comprehensive kind of agenda and programmatic systematic system to address these problems. So, none of them are right. Basically, is the position I'm trying to make.
And this is going to destroy the Republican Party.
Yeah.
This immigration issue, because you can see Rupert Murdoch
freaking out,
who created the Tea Party as who's its own Frankenstein's monster now.
Yeah.
With the Republican Party.
Yeah.
And it's going to split a rail right through it.
Yeah, they're quaking in their boots. A few more articles here. Another interesting kind of editorial by James Baker III. Huge insider. He was at Bohemian Grove, Bilderberger. He's like a Henry Kissinger.
Nice.
Yeah. Just been establishment
guy.
Hates
development?
Pretty much, but it's interesting, this article, because you're seeing the continued dissolving of the consensus of the ruling class of what to do about all these issues. The neocons want endless war and bombing and all that stuff. But the more maybe thoughtful people like Baker, more intelligent, are not of that camp. And so when Baker's talking, he's speaking for a larger contingent of the ruling class. It's interesting to see what he says. So he's saying, we're at a crossroads kind of language. America must always lead on the global stage. American foreign policy should be neither too strong nor too weak. It's hard to fault the president's just right rhetoric, but it's hard to imagine his words did anything to bolster confidence among our allies or earn respect from our adversaries. Talking about the West Point speech. So he says, how can we return to our leadership role in the world without a high-risk, open-ended military intervention that the president rightly rejects? So, World War would obviously reassert dominance, right? So he's kind of like
I don't think we'd win.
He's kind of tacitly admitting that. He's like, we blow up the world, and then it'll be like, man, those Americans really knew how to kill stuff. And that'll be with the UFOs flying by, seeing a blown out planet, will be like, oh. Anyway, so he says we should do these following things. First, we should be careful about making promises or threats without considering the consequences. Wow. I mean, hey, that's pretty sensible, right? That's hopeful.
Can't argue there.
Yeah. This is especially true for presidential declarations, which are authoritative statements of U.S. foreign policy. Mr. Obama's infamous red line on the use of chemical weapons by Syrian government illustrates the disarray that it injures that a offhanded statement can cause. There is room for creative ambiguity in foreign policy, but we should say what we mean and mean what we say.
The fact that they're trying to start a war based on a throwaway line like that is absolutely...
During election season. Like in presidential debates.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's so... To think that you would start a war over, well, I said this thing, and now I look like an idiot, kind of.
Let's go kill 2 million people.
Yeah, no, that's
all on my pride.
Yeah, ridiculous.
You should be that prideful that you should be willing to plunge the world into war based on that. But anyway, also he mentions that, of course, the red line statement, which was very...
It seemed like...
just stupid. But anyway, what about Kerry's chemical weapons warning statements, right? So Kerry's Secretary of State, he says, if Assad gives up all his chemical weapons, then we can avoid war. Mm-hmm. No. It's like, that one, we aren't talking about that offhanded statement. It's the offhanded statement that justifies war that's okay, but not the offhanded statement that gets us out of this pickle and gives them an out to not get into war, Very selective. Anyway, it says, second, we should strive for greater stability in the Middle East, particularly given what is now happening in Iraq.
How many articles have I read that had that statement in it? Jesus.
What do they mean by that?
Greater stability in the Middle East. Okay, so how many troops do you want? Is that where's the payoff here?
The punchline. The failure of the Geneva Conference on Syria and the moribund Arab-Israel peace talks, we should take the lead in organizing a coalition to develop multilateral strategy dealing with the conflicts. Because those conflicts are fueling global terrorism, an international solution is needed. Well, when you alienate all potential allies that could be used to create these systems of international cooperation, to deal with these real problems, radical Islamic extremists and terrorists, which
getting
are
their money from
Saudi Arabia,
Qatar, the Gulf states,
with
UAE.
With after that, it's Israel's complicit, then Turkey's complicit, then the French and the British are complicit, then we're being kind of dragged along this whole thing with the neocons, of course, and their Zionist connections, pushing for greater Israel hegemony in that area, whatever idiotic thing, which actually makes the
millennial style thinking. Millennial,
yeah, right.
Is it not millennial, but
yeah,
apocalyptic? Really.
Yeah. It's okay.
Ragnarok.
Year 2000 was 14 years ago. Let's get out of this mindset. There'll only be apocalypse if we actively create one.
Yeah.
So let's get out of the mindset that is working on actively creating that. Such negotiations must involve all the region's players, including Israel and Iran. So James Baker is saying Iran must be included in regional peace talks. That's huge.
That's new. That's absolutely correct.
Because John Kerry even threw a hissy fit that he didn't want Iran to be invited to his birthday party.
Yeah,
it's his Sweet 16, and he wanted a pony, and he got the pink Barbie sports, go-go Power Wheels that he wanted, but his childish nature needs to be thrown out. Yeah. Russia, China, and the European Union must also be included in Iran peace talks. So he's saying China and Russia should be included in regional talks, not even just the Iran question, the Iraq question, the Syria question, the two-state solution or lack thereof in Israel. Israel-Palestine.
One state. Get along.
Yeah.
Stop this.
If it's possible.
Well, rising standard of living would help.
That would help. That's why Netanyahu has to keep the austerity going. Every one of these countries has an interest in preventing the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria from spreading its influence and terror. So, this thing that we were funding and giving bland approval all throughout the Obama administration is now deemed a threat by James Baker, right? So you're seeing the breakup, really, here of the U.S.-Saudi relationship, which has always been, very tenuous. It's always been, reinforced through geopolitical meddling in their backyard to justify it and this kind of stuff. That is running aground right now. That relationship between us and the Gulf states is on the rocks with a big contingent of the ruling class. This is not worth it anymore. This is just not viable. Some will argue that Iran should not be party to any discussions about Iraq because that would be tantamount to inviting Iran into Iraq. But the reality is Iran is already the most influential external player in Iraq and so an effort without Iranian participation will likely fail. After all, Iran cooperated with the United States early on in the conflict in Afghanistan. Are there obstacles to convening such a conference? Too many to list. Is success guaranteed? By no means. But the same can be said about most important diplomatic initiatives. Third, we need to find ways to convince our allies that we will honor our security commitments to them. So they're talking about the South China Sea, trumped up crap in the Ukraine, Crimea. Oh my God. The people of Crimea, after a fascist coup in Kiev, voted to secede from a illegal government and then voted to join the country they were already part of 20 years ago, which is right next to them and speaks the same language, is the same culture, for all intents and purposes, is the same country, and that is somehow reason to, so he's still a warmonger, right? He's still an imperialist, but he's saying that this stuff of regional Middle Eastern conflicts, we don't really have a stake in this game anymore. Offhanded statements, we should be careful what we say, and we should be careful about making promises or threats without considering the consequences. There's like a rational process going on here compared to John McCain. He wants to saddle up a nuke and just fly into the great beyond.
Yeah, I saw an ISI guy or ISIS guy tweeted a picture with him and John McCain posing together.
Nice,
probably from Syria.
Yeah, and he was meeting with Al Qaeda. Yeah. Anyone who wants to start a war, John McCain's your best buddy. Trade deal negotiation. Okay, so here's one. Fourth, the White House should resolutely push for free trade, both with Asia and with Europe. Hey, libertarians. James Baker, like deep insider. He was that guy that Alex Jones, after Alex Jones had crashed the Bohemian Grove thing, was like confronted James Baker and was like, "Oh, you're the guy that crashed that?" Fuck you. That guy. So, deep insider, Henry Kissinger level of just deep state is saying we want free trade.
No surprises.
If you're for free trade, think again. If you're finding yourself strangely in bed with Wall Street, The Economist, the City of London, and James Baker.
Yeah.
The White House should pay particular attention to the proposed Trans-Pacific Partnership, a major trade deal between 12 Pacific Rim countries. Trade deal negotiations sit stalled while Beijing pushes 16 Asian nations to create a competing regional comprehensive economic partnership. Government and business leaders in the region, including traditional American allies, are waiting for Washington to prove its long-discussed, quote, pivot to Asia, unquote, by completing this agreement. That means following up its good works on free trade by getting fast-track authority through Congress. So we see with just the self-interested nature of all these other countries, right? We just covered in the Australia article, 36% of their exports go to China. So trying to create this antagonism between them and China, good luck.
Yeah, not going to do
That's going to be really hard to get through all these countries.
Alienate your allies doing that.
Yeah, and even the Tea Party rank and file, not the House leadership may be against it, and the progressive caucuses are going to be definitely against it. So that's a hard sell. Anyway, it says fifth, the White House should be worried about unilaterally reducing carbon emissions. We don't want to damage our economic recovery. EPA regulations. They're going to reduce economic growth. Climate change is a global problem. It needs to be dealt with on a global level. We're not going to, quote-unquote, unilaterally disarm by an American reductions emissions plan. We have to convince others to join in a truly global solution. They want a worldwide carbon tax to totally strangle
China, strangle Russia,
strangle all economic growth and Chinese, African integration, everything, right? And that's utopia. They're not going to. These other countries are not going to commit suicide on the hysterical things of carbon emissions when they already have contingent plans to deal with the pollution that is caused in reality by these carbon emitting things like coal. Coal is just filthy. And things coming out of a coal plant, the least you got to worry about is the carbon. They got mercury, cadmium, radionuclides, lead, arsenic, all kinds of shit. The president should kickstart. Okay, so here is this is really pathetic too. Here is James Baker's recovery plan for the United States. The president should kickstart the U.S. economy with pro-growth economic policies. I wonder what those would be. Right, more liberalization, I'm sure. Breaking the political logjam over the Keystone XL pipeline and improving that project would be a good start. Expediting the approval of permits for LNG export facilities will also help. And will over time help Europe wean itself on over-reliance from Russian natural gas. Right, so the James Baker economic policy for recovery is more trade liberalization, I'm sure domestic liberalization of the economy, privatization, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the things he does say, Keystone XL, fracking, and LNG export facilities. That we're going to become the new Saudi Arabia, and so outcompete Russia in its own backyard for hydrocarbons.
Yeah.
Totally ridiculous. But you see, the hopeful thing about that article and why I wanted to cover it is just the warmonger camp, I think, is a minority in the U.S. ruling class for
I would agree with
launching any kind of thing, being embroiled in any kind of thing. They realize it doesn't pursue our own interests. It does not further American hegemony. It actually weakens us, even in their own imperial sense. So, that said, one of these last Wall Street Journal articles is they cover a huge side article called "Bombing Iran is the Best Option."
Wow.
Yeah, and it's a book, Time to Attack by Matthew Croning. 256 pages, $28. Here's a prediction. The peace settlements about Iran's nuclear power program will fail. Right now, their 30-year project of getting nuclear weapons and ICBMs. It's interesting because he covers stuff I didn't know about Iran. Like, apparently Iran is trying to build rockets and stuff that could deliver.
Yeah, they have their space program.
Yeah, and like how much of this could be shifted to a nuclear system for creating nuclear, an ICBM with a nuclear warhead. So he says, no country on Earth, not even the United States, mounts conventional warheads on ICBMs. So Iran is building ICBMs, he writes, basically. I don't know if that's true, but to me, I just see that they're putting a giant thing here and saying bombing Iran is the best option on a side article, which is an extensive length. That's pretty scary. The answer to me for Iran and the nuclear question is use thorium, use Lifter, because they can get nuclear power, if that's what they really want, without the threat of enrichment and the ability to create a bomb, because the way Lifter works does not facilitate creating weapons-grade plutonium. So another world problem that can be solved by technological development, even on the political landscape of it, where it's like a chemical weapons out, like Syria, we'll give you the chemical weapons. Now you have no pretext to bomb us. If Iran said, okay, we're done with the centrifuges, we're done with old power systems of nuclear power, we're going to Lifter because China just developed it, and China might be done developing it in 2015, then Iran could say it as an out, if it really honestly doesn't want nuclear weapons. Because if it does, they're serious. I mean, it looks like the establishment is not going to allow them to get a bomb, and the Israelis, to them, this is like a life or death issue. That's how they see it. One last Wall Street Journal article here. This is a fantastic article because it just openly illustrates the contention and eternal war between finance capitalism and industrial capital. So it's a huge whole-page article talking about crony capitalism, a fact of modern economies. Big business and government more intricately entangled than earbud cords. So if there's one thing the populists on the left and right can agree upon, it's disdain for crony capitalism. It is distaste for the cesspool of Washington influence in which big business lobbyists canoodle with lawmakers to get their way. It is an anger at corporate welfare enriching America's biggest companies at the expense of the little guy. So, crony capitalism, insider deals, backhanded stuff, lobbying. But then they pin this on the Import-Export Bank of the United States. So one of the last dirigistic things that exist in the United States. So if you're Japan and you want to buy some planes from Boeing, you can get a subsidized rate from the Import-Export Bank, which is owned by the government. Because, if you turn to J.P. Morgan for interest rates, they would be obviously higher. So it's something that subsidizes exchange and facilitates better trade, so you're not at the whim of whatever the market bubble speculated implosion, explosion of credit is doing that specific day, right? Oh, I was planning on buying 60 Boeing 757s, some Brayton cycle, super high-tech GE industrial turbines. But by the way, I can't do that because now, you're in it's 2008 or whatever, and there's huge deflation, so the interest rates are going to be through the roof. There's a big credit bubble or whatever, right? It's just riding this wave of credit bubbles. Anyway, so we have this bank. How one stands on reauthorization of the Export-Import Bank of the United States is a test of who's really in charge of the Republican Party. pitting business interests against populist Tea Party wing. The two sides could agree that they hate Obamacare, that they want to cut social welfare spending. But the debate over the Export-Import Bank pits the likes of the Heritage Foundation of Americans for Prosperity directly against the preferences of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and National Association of Manufacturers. Between the Heritage Foundation and the Chamber of Commerce, which one would you pick?
Chamber of Commerce.
Right. At least the Chamber of Commerce actually represents productive jobs to a large extent, and especially the National Association of Manufacturers. I'll take them over the fucking Heritage Foundation any day of the week. But here we go with Dave Bratt again. Dave Bratt represents the opposite. He's saying finance capital is king, and you can have nothing that supports actual industrialization, anything remaining of an industrial process that exists in the United States that doesn't first go through the arbiters of Wall Street, that we have to approve or decline, or we have to extract value basically on every transaction made with anybody, right?
They set up the so-called free market.
Yeah, they're the intermediary between every transaction, right? Whenever you're buying or selling anything, there's three parties in that transaction. There's you, the person you're buying it from, and then the money between the two of you, which is the intermediary between you and them. And so that's the third party here. And that, like, whatever you're dealing with any other player, any exchange, a Japan airline, a Taiwanese airline, a Malaysian airline wants to buy some planes from Boeing, they're having to go through Wall Street, in effect, and get taxed by that without the Export-Import Bank. The Export-Import Bank is a bastion of resistance and dirigism against Wall Street for the big industrialists. So the schism here is clear. If you can't see the difference between these two factions, that's unfortunate, because this is like the best we can hope for, is to pit these people against Wall Street. And they already have this institutional strength of saying, hey, we've been using this Export-Import Bank for a long-ass time. It's been great for us. It helps facilitate trade. And there's radical fascist interests like the Heritage Foundation that want to get rid of it. So you are already seeing that the industrial base of this country is under continued attack by Wall Street, by the extractors, the parasites, who want to extract value out of everything, just by being the intermediary between the two parties. But when you dive into the debate, it offers something else, a fascinating case study of how modern economies. So it's saying the Chamber of Commerce and the National Association of Manufacturers want it. And it says, when you dive into the debate, it also offers something else, a fascinating case study of how modern economies really work, and the ways big business and big government are inevitably intertwined in ways that believers in free markets may not like, but may not be able to avoid. In short, we're all crony capitalists, whether we like it or not.
Oh, aren't we?
Yeah.
Really? Like, am I a crony capitalist?
Yeah, Evan, your crony capitalist ways.
Can't stop stuffing money in politicians' pocket.
you would caught on to you. So here it covers the use of the Import-Export Bank. So what is the Import-Export Bank? Its job is to provide financing for American exports. When a Brazilian airline buys a Boeing 737 or a Turkish electric utility buys General Electric turbines, both examples I used, that's kind of funny. Because that's some of the few things we actually still make.
Yeah.
So they can receive financing through the bank at more favorable interest rates than would be available at a private market. Smaller American companies looking to export can borrow working capital to help float the cost of selling their goods overseas. Borrowers pay interest on those loans and the loan guarantee fees, which allow the bank to return cash to taxpayers. I'll repeat that. The borrowers pay interest on those loans and loan guarantee fees, which allows the bank to return cash to taxpayers. The Congressional Budget Office projects that using standard government accounting, the bank will refund $14 billion over the next decade to the Treasury Department. So do you get that? That by having this dirigistic bank doesn't cost us anything. It costs us nothing. Because that Import-Export Bank can make the loans and get paid the interest on those loans, which is less than what the quote-unquote free market, the cartel of LIBOR fraud banks, would give them. That facilitates exports and high industrial manufacturing techniques, which in turn returns to the government $14 billion over the next decade, so $1.4 billion a year in revenue. This is like when, at the close of the Civil War with the greenback system, the United States federal government, at statistics that I saw at the Museum of the Treasury in New York, I went there, they made over half of their money. The federal government was making over half of its revenue by loans. Do you know how big of a threat that is to Wall Street? That the federal government would be profiting off of loans?
Existential.
Yeah, like life and death. Anyway, so it says, as a shuck here, it says, but taxpayers are subsidizing the bank to the tune of $2 billion for the same period if you use the fair value method of accounting, calculating the values of the guarantees and below market loans of the bank issues. So if you use Enron accounting, then it shows the cost is $2 billion, but with actual like
Arthur Anderson accounting,
with actually like generally accepted accounting principles, with GAAP accounting, it makes us $14 billion. This is like I had this technical training class for my work a few years ago. He worked for a seismology branch of the federal government. They did high frequency mapping of mineral deposits and oil deposits using like really high level technology, DARPA stuff, I think like that. And the information they derived from that was so useful, they could sell it to Exxon and to Shell and BP and make money. And so their whole department that did this scientific process got this information, sold that information to these mineral resource extraction companies, was net positive. They were in the black. They made money for the federal government by this sales of information. They were shut down. And you're seeing the same thing here, right? The Import-Export Bank makes money for you as a taxpayer. You have to pay less taxes than you would otherwise because this, fundamentally, part because this bank exists. So what else could we be financing as a state?
A national bank.
As a sovereign state that could be funding the development of the economy and returning those receipts of interest to the economy. A lot. That's a huge thing, right? So this article is really keen on doing that. To continue, bigger companies, the Boeings and GEs of the world, have access to huge global banks that are used to dealing with those types of risks. But America's corporate giants have to fight for business against competitors that benefit from an advantageous government-subsidized trade finance. Boeing might have plenty of access to capital from Citigroup or JP Morgan to help its customers finance airplane purchases, yet it has to fight for business against Europe's Airbus, which is aided by subsidized loans from Europe's equivalent of an import-export bank. And there's the rub for those who want to shut down the import-export bank. It's all well and good to assail crony capitalism. I wouldn't even call that crony capitalism. What's crony about it?
Yeah.
You're saying you provide an actual service as compared to JP Morgan and Citigroup, which just sell derivatives and work in illegal forms of insurance and high-frequency trading.
Usury rates.
Yeah. So Boeing and GE stuff's actually based on actual real physical economic production, and they're calling that crony capitalism because they have a tiny little quadrant of resistance, a little Alamo, against the financial predations of these huge Wall Street banks, which would love the step between these importers and exporters and Boeing and GE and effectively tax them,
But Boeing and GE don't want that.
And they have enough power to resist it at present. But they got enough, the radical Tea Party group is even more in favor of Wall Street, even more radically opposed to things that actually prevent us from just totally having a disintegrated currency.
And
Can
this
you imagine?
also shows like a blueprint you can have to split this ruling class.
Yeah, totally.
And get them to fight each other.
Exactly.
Break the power of Wall Street and use Boeing, Caterpillar, Lockheed Martin.
This clearly illustrates it. These people are on your side.
Yeah.
They can be turned for a betterment of humanity. And when you look at the eras in which we focus on historically, of the eras of progress, it was in an era of partnership and cooperation between private industrial interest and the state to improve living standards. That's the huge difference, right? Because they'll say, fascism, that's the allegiance, the corporate state, the government and working with the corporations. No, that's too simple. It's doing that for a financial form of capitalism as opposed to industrial, primarily, and then crushing wages, lowering the standard of living. That makes all the difference in the world, right? Like, what is your intention of this cooperation? Where you look in China, it's to raise the standard of living. It's dependent on the intention, which you can't derive intention from like just a glance at looking at structure, right? You got to look at a deeper analysis of just passing, really broad 5,000-foot view won't do it. More broadly, the debate over the Import-Export Bank exposes the uncomfortable truth about global capitalism. As much as a purist might believe, there exists some state of nature in which governments neither subsidize nor obstruct business, and capitalism represents a pure survival of the fittest. But that isn't the world we actually live in. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Surprise.
So, yeah, shocking. We never did.
Yeah.
If these people actually read history, you were seeing Alexander Hamilton responding against in his economic essays that he sent to Congress on the report on manufacturers, for example. He was saying, it would be nice if these things of Adam Smith's theory were true, and all these governments were treating business the same exact way. That would be one thing, but they're not. And so if the other people are ineffectively cheating, don't we have to compensate for them to cheat? They're giving themselves a huge benefit, and don't you have to give them a handicap on the other side of that to mitigate what they're doing? That's the thing. It's an active process. It's not just some leave it, set it, and forget it system of economics. China has around a 15% import tariff, so that means that when we're exchanging with China, they're at a huge advantage. So we should have a 15% import tariff.
Yeah.
You're not playing on equal terms with any of these other countries. And fundamentally, you're just not doing that anyway, because the standards of living now, like in Hamilton's time, that can make some sense. Because you're going from a life of basically subsistence, yeoman farmers, peasant farmers, into the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Now, that's way different. Because you have already industrialized societies versus still peasant farmers who are competing with each other. And that creates a whole other layer to it. But, so it's even more complex, right? So to subscribe to these neoclassical, neoliberal models is even just more totally absurd than it's ever been. Last statement of the article, there's a principled libertarian case to be made that this world we live in of big companies and big governments working hand in hand stifles competition and makes consumers worse off. It is less clear that getting rid of the Import-Export Bank would do much to change that. Right.
Yeah.
It does nothing. But, it does, in the short term, enrich Wall Street. And so Wall Street is salivating to try to destroy that Import-Export Bank. Deprive your country of $14 billion over 10 years of revenue. What else could we be doing? Imagine all mortgages in this whole country being financed by the federal government. Some interest rate that would just be basically the cost of administering a loan, 2%. You want to buy a house? Well, we want people to own houses, so we're going to finance housing at 2%. We'll have structures in place to prevent housing booms, real estate speculation, things like that, of course, as well. Contingent on those loans, right? If you're making the loans, you can make the rules for the loans. So you can also minimize gentrification, do all this other kind of stuff. And the revenue from that, look at the total cost, or even a sizable portion of the people that wanted to buy into that, because you can make it optional. So you're going to get a government loan, 2.25%, and then about 1/4% of that is administrating the loan office and covering defaults and people that aren't going to pay or go bankrupt or whatever. And then 2% of that revenue is tax receipts. So the left has to get out of this mindset of the income tax, consumption taxes, sales taxes, income taxes, because that doesn't get you any friends. And there could be a huge outreach of political commonality of interest if we made, repeal the income tax, or how about this, $250,000 tax exemption from the income tax. You don't pay any income tax on the first $250,000 you make. You want something to unite the 95% and the 5% against the 1%, basically? I know it's 101%, but you know what I mean. The 94%, the 5% against the 1%, that's how you do it. You want something to unite the 5%ers, against the 1%, the finance oligarchs? This is how you do it, the Import-Export Bank. That's how you do this kind of stuff, right? Unite the industrial class, unite the working class, unite these interests.
Professional class.
Yeah. Lawyers, doctors, dentists. Who else? Just professionals. Engineers, high-level engineers.
Tech engineers.
Yeah.
People like that.
All that kind of stuff. They all make, around under $250,000. Get them on your side. Can you imagine having a political party and a campaign based on $250,000 tax exemption, repeal all consumption taxes? We want to keep alcohol and cigarette taxes. That's fine, but
in terms of just like sales taxes and income taxes. Income taxes are way too much. And so you could do that, and you could cover those things by having federal financing for things that humans need to live.
Houses.
Mortgages, things like that. So anyway, that shows the blueprint. That shows the contention, and it shows how the Tea Party factions are, ideological zombies, but they're even worse than the establishment Republicans, who might see a need to say, hey, they have a kind of a sense of what's going on in the world, and they're saying, China isn't doing this. If we do this, we're going to lose more business to China, lose more business to the EU, which have these institutions. So one angle of it is like we want more trade liberalization, make these TPP agreements so that no one can have an import-export bank, that kind of thing, so Wall Street can dominate that entire landscape of economics. And, anyway, really useful article to see the division. And also to know, like, the best you can hope for is what we're saying, and what we have been saying. That you're not... if you want to overhaul the tax code, or if you want to, be battling toe-to-toe with these GE and Boeings and import-export banks, that you're siding with worse evils by doing it. What was that one, the headline about Obama?
BBC. President Obama has dismissed the idea that supplying U.S. arms could help defeat Assad is a fantasy.
I'm sure McCain's boiling with rage about hearing that.
What? Those are my friends.
This notion that somehow there was this ready-made, moderate Syrian force that was able to defeat Assad is simply not true. We have spent a lot of time trying to work with a moderate opposition in Syria. But, as I said yesterday...
meddling in the internal affairs of other sovereign UN states. Mm-hmm. Totally illegal.
And, folks who have never fought before, going up against a ruthless opposition in Assad, the notion that they
just
were
re-elected too.
Position suddenly
overwhelmingly
turn, not only Assad but also ruthless, highly trained jihadists. If we just sent a few arms, is a fantasy.
It'd end up in the hands of the jihadists before you could turn around. And where those jihadists trained was Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Qatar.
Yeah, the neocons would have been totally, let's carpet bomb the whole country. So you're seeing, the Republicans are infinitely worse. And, if you're a registered Republican, stop that. It's not a good idea. I unregistered Republican, a year ago? I just, never had changed it from back in the day. From back voting for Bush in 2000 and never had voted for a mainstream party person since then.
Oh, man.
Right when I turned 18, too. It's like, okay. And, to be, I guess to my credit, go back and look at what Bush ran on in 2000. It sounded good.
Yeah, it sounded like Obama in 08. No.
He was even more like, definitely, I mean, just in terms of mendacity, in terms of stark reversal and lying, yeah. It was like, we shouldn't be the policeman of the world, this and that. He was talking about peace, ironically. So that obviously changed. Coups are crazy.
Coups are crazy.
But, Obama's coming out and saying this war wasn't viable. We looked into it. No amount of funding of weapons at any given point would have turned it around. So he's saying, war is not an option here, and it seems like so remotely off. It's like way off the table. Mm-hmm. It's like off the table, rolled down the hallway, around the corner, like fell down the stairs. It's like it's just not even in sight anymore. Tip your hat to your own activism if you were part of that process, and realize that we may need to do that again with Iraq soon, or that is a possibility. What did Shields and Brooks cover? And they're just yakking.
They did Iraq and Ukraine. And presidential poll numbers, of course. Got to horse race it up.
Every dip of every 0.1% is monitored.
That is syndicated columnist Mark Shields and New York Times columnist David Brooks. Welcome, gentlemen. So the Faith and Freedom Coalition, Mark, what is the fact that they held this? They heard from these potential candidates in 2016. What should we think about the place of religious conservatives in the Republican Party today?
Well, it's
millstone around the neck of progress,
and not certainly represented by the turnout. I mean, because candidates showed up wanting, if not to be their first choice, to be, as John Weaver, the Republican strategist, said, their second or third choice. And for example, Chris Christie is not going to be the first choice of religious conservatives, but he wants to be on good terms with them in case.
Chris Christie, who's that?
Is in the I'd say this, Judy, the economic conservatives, the fiscal conservatives, certainly represented by the Tea Party and its energy, has eclipsed them. And plus, America has changed. And just think about it. 10 years ago, George W. Bush's campaign for re-election was based in large part as a strategic force by putting on the ballot same-sex marriage, and all of which were defeated overwhelmingly and helped him carry the state of Ohio, the crucial state of Ohio, against John Kerry. That's changed in America. And so part of that, the religious
you can't
faith and freedom group
bait people on gay marriage anymore as a way to continue wars and financial oppression. You can't blame it on the queers.
Like, I can't feed my family, and we don't have any education, and our jobs all left and went overseas. They're like, well, what do you think about gay marriage? It's like, I don't give a shit about gay marriage. I want to eat.
Is kind of looking for its issue and its traction as well as its agenda.
Eclipsed by the Tea Party?
Yeah, I think only a little. Clearly on some of the budget issues, the social issues have not been as prominent. And clearly in the Washington debate we've had over the last 3 or 4 years.
Dave Brooks represents the Eric Cantor wing of the Republican Party.
Yeah. Nothing to worry about.
We got this.
As powerful as he always has been. Rick Santorum did fantastically well last time.
Yeah.
Winning double-digit states
the
on the backs of these voters. Mm-hmm. And if you can win double-digit states being Rick Santorum, a guy who got crushed in Pennsylvania, if you're a more plausible candidate, you can do really well. The donors of the party often say, we should get off the abortion issue. Whatever you think of substance, politically that would be insane for the Republican Party. They need to be a pro-life party. And then finally, I do think there are issues...
In women's uteruses, but pro-death everywhere else.
Yeah.
The first is family formation, which they talk about very well and very comfortably. And second is religious liberty issues, especially abroad. There's a lot of talk about it in the conference this year, religious issues abroad, the Christian in Sudan, who's possibly going to be executed, but then religious liberties at home, some of the groups that are going to be called hate groups because of their religious beliefs. So I think that religious liberty issue is a sleeper issue, which will power and repower this movement.
I would just say, Rick,
what an old white party. Holy crap. So they're running on religion, abortion, the same old, bring them out, boys.
Yeah.
Come on, baby. Daddy needs a new pair of shoes. We got this one more time.
Enough money and we can get in there.
I'm for family values. Well, I'm Jeb Bush. Vote for me.
Yeah. How? I mean, the abortion issue is such a touchy thing, right? But
well, if you want there to be less abortions, you want more economic opportunity, because that's really the reason why people get abortions for the most part. Is because they're in economically dire situations and they can't imagine bringing a kid into the world.
Right, and you look at the economically homo economists, right? Like the human as it exists in the economic context of the society it lives in. Like, we know what it takes to grow more people, to have people more prosperous and be well fed, well clothed, well taken care of. But the Republican Party is totally against that. But they want you to have babies, and if not even that, they just want you to not have the choice if you get pregnant, birth control fails, whatever, having any way out of the situation.
Well, they just do that for votes because a huge part of their base is hardcore Christian, and that's a way that, because they're not promising them anything else. They're not promising peace. They're not promising them jobs. They're not going to help them, pay for college or do anything like that. But they can throw, this abortion issue at them, and that was a way to give votes.
Yeah.
I don't think, the elite of the Republican Party care at all. I mean, I think Brooks just said that, the donors want to get off this abortion issue, and they should be, because a lot of them are women.
Yeah.
A lot of high-powered women. Mm-hmm. It's just impossible for them to vote Republican because it's an anti-woman party. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, and I would see, obviously there's that level of the social kind of touchiness of it and everything like that. That's one angle of it. It's just red meat, right? So they can't resist. But the more diabolic nature of it is where you get into these history readings, as we're doing with the Whig Party and covering British imperial economics versus the American system, is that you see, as we've talked about before, the cultivating of a slave class. And something that's really useful for that is having children born out of wedlock, born without a father, born, really bad economic conditions, because you can turn those children into, they can feed
employees before you know it.
Yeah,
Walmart
employees, they aren't going to be sufficiently resistant to being further enslaved and crushed. And, they could be, or if they get out of the poverty that they're born into, typically, is what, this is looking to cultivate, that they go join the Imperial Army and go, destroy some third world country.
Yeah.
So you're feeding the military industrial complex, you're feeding the Walmart, the job economy, you're feeding the prison industrial complex, you're cultivating an underclass, strike breakers, people that will be used as a battering ram against the middle class. And this is all very cynically calculated. So when they say, we're the party of pro-life, it doesn't look like it from my perspective. Of we'll delve into the history of it, and you see that the interest of the oligarchy to create that underclass is ever present. And so if they can do it this way or some other way, it's just a way to do it. So if they can have kids born and die, unloved children being born into desperate circumstances, they don't care.
And making abortion illegal is not going to end abortion. You're just going to have back alley, hanger-style abortions.
Yeah. And Torum's message was essentially, I agree with you, he was a cultural conservative, always has been staunch, but he was a blue-collar candidate. He's called his party to task for being the party. And he said he wants to represent the Americans who get up every morning and punch a time clock, who pack a lunch at his convention in 2012, did not speak to those people. They spoke only to entrepreneurs and people founding their own businesses.
The religious conservatives, it's true, have moved. They moved, as Mark just described, in a more blue-collar direction. They've also moved to the right in other issues. There used to be a strong evangelical immigration reform constituency.
That's right.
That's diminished. A strong evangelical environmental constituency, that's diminished. So they moved down market, if you want to put it that way, and also rightward on certain issues.
But does that say the Republican candidates in 2016 not only can't ignore this group of conservatives, that they have to continue to cater to them, to talk about the issues that they care about?
To appeal to them.
To appeal to them.
Yes, they're very important. They provide energy, they provide passion, they provide foot soldiers, they provide votes. And I would just say the evangelical conservatives on the environment and on immigration are still out there and are still active and still energized. They just aren't as active as welcome in the Republican coalition right now.
Now, one of them we just heard from the House, newly elected David House Majority Leader, Kevin McCarthy. Have you seen enough of him to get any impression yet about how the House is going to change, how Congress is going to change?
Yeah, I know him. I've done with him a few times. Listen, kids, pays to be nice. He's just a good guy. And I don't think he represents anything particularly ideological one way or the other. He's not a particularly ideological guy. His expertise is in knowing congressional districts. He's a political guy, a campaign guy.
And gerrymandering. Campaign finance. Dude, all right, great.
Like, he isn't hemmed down from ideology. He's just a total expedient, power politician.
Yeah.
And so that plays well in politics, especially in the leadership race.
So what's going to change?
Well, it's what politicians used to be instead of these ideological lightning rods. Yeah, they used to be engaging and try and figure out ways to build bridges to other people and
build bridges. He said something like that.
Only rhetorically.
Yeah.
Rhetorical bridges first, physical bridges later.
Eric Cantor, there was always a sense lurking over his shoulder. The ambition was there, and he certainly his fingerprints were all over the sabotaging of the great bargain with President Obama on the budget. His being Eric
good.
Cantor's.
You think Dave Bratt's going to be able to better negotiate that?
No.
Yeah.
He's very good at his business, and bringing for California, Bakersfield, perspective to it.
This little point I want to elaborate on. They couldn't get the grand austerity sellout bargain, even under such moderate leadership as Eric Cantor. So when you have a hyper-radicalized Dave Bratt, proto-fascist wing of the Republican Party, that's going to be just even more impossible for governance to work. Good old Shields and Brooks.
Good old Shields.
He's already on record as saying he believes there has to be a path to legal status for undocumented workers. So
yeah.
That's a day like him. He may have to reassure.
So then they can get into unions.
Isn't some sort of a one word, but
That's right.
That's what California does.
Are you sure you don't just like him because of his Irish heritage?
Kevin and his daughters are like Reagan and Megan. Yeah, he does.
But neither one of you sees things changing in terms of the House, the Republicans.
Just as Mark said, a more
the way
unified
the
leadership.
House operates.
More unified leadership. John Boehner's life will be better. It'll be happier. He'll be happier.
Well, what does that mean for the president who, let's talk about the poll numbers that came out. NBC Wall Street Journal poll shows, and we've got some
Well,
of these
here we
to
go.
share with
Wall Street Journal
our
poll.
audience. Overall, the president's approval rating.
Here we
The
go.
numbers we saw earlier, yeah.
37% of those polled, David said they approve of the way the president's handling foreign policy. He's in the middle of Iraq. It's come off of Syria. I mean,
I would love to know what questions they actually asked the Wall Street Journal readers, because in terms of Obama, one of the only redeeming things about him is the foreign policy. That he has not taken the plunge on these giant wars that these other factions, the Saudis and the Zionists and the neocons and the Republicans, all want him to do. So that's only one thing that people should be supporting him on. So, like, what kind of, Frank Luntz kind of questions did they ask him to get that low of a number? I don't know.
He might be. There are sort of two tracks the second termers have. There's the Clinton track where they go up at the end, and then there's the George W. track where they go down at the end, and he's sort of trailing the George W. track, maybe not quite as deep.
Wow, that's deep. That's great analysis, Brooks.
At some point, it's hard for him just because people are interested in other things, just fatigue. And a lot of people have a sense, you should hear from people, and I don't think this is true in Illinois, but you hear from people around Washington, but certainly around the country, that guy just wants to get out. He's just done.
2.5 years left.
Yeah. But there's a sense they're not doing much, they seem fatigued, and so there's a perception out there that Obama is not, charging in the office every morning and wants to take charge of the country. And I do think the reason the polls are sliding is a sense of lack of energy in the White House, that we're proposing big things, that we have big visions. And if I were him, I'd say, let's try some big things. Let's counteract this.
Yeah, I'd agree. Like an infrastructure program.
Right. $1 trillion of high-speed rail investment. How about that?
If you ask them,
You get a huge boost.
Exhausted, and are you guys just checked out? They deny it fervently.
Peter Hart, the Democratic pollster who did the poll that we just never showed up along with Republican Bill McIntyre, made the point that the president seems to be the captor of events rather than we like to think of our presidents as dominating events. Obviously, not everybody can dominate all events.
You guys got rid of that. They got the passive president that they want. And now they're like complaining about it,
The Veterans Administration, it just seems constantly on the defensive. And I think, Judy, the most devastating number was thinking about the rest of Barack Obama's term as president. Do you think he can leave the country and get the job done?
And let's show that
okay,
poll.
Excuse me. Okay. You no longer feel that he is able to leave the country and get the job done. Judy, that...
Like it's just the same approval poll number is just skewed to make it look like some other kind of thing that's being said.
It's excessive elections. That's Barack Obama, and here he is with 54% of the American
just
voters.
A year and a half later.
A year and a half later, saying not that it's over, but we just don't think you're up to it. I mean, that is devastating, and it's devastating for Democrats going into it. The poll is not good for Republicans.
Right, and we have the numbers to show there. If you think the president's doing poorly, look at this. It's 41, the Democrats overall 38, the Republican Party 29, and the Tea Party 22. But this sense, Mark...
So they're covering poll ratings of saying Obama's approval rating of 41% compared to the GOP approval rating of 29%.
Yeah, purple-faced GOP people, all of them.
That's devastating. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing is, though, is that the Tea Party and the GOP are probably combined greater than the support for the Democrats, but they're totally...
They fight each other now because of immigration.
Yeah, they're totally in open warfare with each other, so it's similar to the Whig Party, right?
Yeah.
That the anti-slavery Whig Party of the Democrats was heavily outnumbered compared to the wrangling between the northern and southern pro-slavery Democrats and the southern pro-slavery Whigs. The party that represented actual common man's interest was always in the minority, in that era, in this era, until these new coalitions were able to be built, and that's how you build them. Is that what I was saying? $250,000 tax exemption, right?
Yeah.
Get the people together. Get the working population, the blue collar, the middle Americans, and the professional class united. This is how you do it, right? So.
The point that Mark just made about the sense that the president is reacting. What does a president do historically? What do presidents do?
Well, they sometimes shake things up and fire people. That sometimes does happen, and it creates a sense of a new beginning. And then the second thing they do is they have a burst of energy on some issue. And I think a foreign policy vision, the president's vision on foreign policy has been what we won't do. And I think that's had a slow corrosive effect on people's sense of energy.
Dude, he would have been in peace if he would have gone to war.
Dave Brooks, the problem with him is he's a wimp. You can see it in him. He's like this just passive figure, right? That if anyone's saying that you should be more aggressive, he's like the little toady of the bully. It's just like that kid from Christmas Story, the one with the little hat. And he's like, yeah, get him, just. That's Dave Brooks, right? Anyone saying anything about aggression, he's just for it. Anyone against aggression, he's like, that's...
Maybe he should restructure and re-strategize.
Yeah. Yeah, but...
And so some big inequality proposals, just to throw them out there and get the debate started. I do not think that would be a dumb idea. At least there would be some big movements, some big things coming out of the White House.
But Iraq, and Mark, you're right. I mean, that's something they've had to react to. The president did announce...
Like, what? People don't want war? That's not going to boost his approval rating?
Yeah.
Yesterday, I guess, military advisors going to Iraq, that's an active step, isn't it?
Not really.
Well, we got 2 hours of stuff.
Cool. Saigon.
Let's just...
and American advisors, 300 advisors.
How's it going?
American, we just sent 25 million to protect the American embassy, which is larger than in Baghdad, which is larger than the Vatican City, it's the most expensive embassy, 10 times larger than any American embassy there to defend. 300 there. We know why they're there to provide it.
But does that suggest he would need to send the Air Force to bomb Iraq?
Yeah, I mean, I assume, from everything I know and have learned, that those American special forces are being sent in primarily to provide the information, the intelligence, the reconnaissance, so that if drones attacks are called in, they know precisely there won't be collateral damage and civilian casualties all over the place. But Judy, I mean, what is the objective? What is the exit strategy? How will we know when we've succeeded? What is the mission? I mean, are we back in where we were 40 years ago?
And you're saying the president hasn't provided it?
There's no sense of national commitment to it. There's no sense of collective national will to it. There's no popular reflection in the Congress to it.
Oh, God, this we're so out of touch.
Yeah, these should.
And how will no one achieve it?
He's like, generally, the problem is generally war boosts public perception of the president. Basically, it gives you an approval rating boost, because there's some kind of boogeyman out there, and the tribal mentality kicks in, and you got to defend against the boogeyman. People are just so sick of war that no longer applies.
Yeah.
So they're freaking out, right? Approval ratings, it's low, that's dangerous. So having a war, would that help it? Oh no, people don't want that either. Man, these people, they don't like austerity, they don't like war. What the hell's wrong with them?
Yeah, Shields and Brooks.
That's
it's like the
Sage-
oracles of old.
Hey, this is Matt. We're putting a lot of effort into the podcast upcoming. We're reading a dozen books, giant stack of books for researching the Whig era and the rise and fall of the Whig Party from 1830 to 1860. Launching a website, just doubling down on all the efforts we put into the podcast so far. We don't make any money off this podcast. If you could help us out just by sharing us on Facebook, liking us on Facebook, it does a lot to expanding the audience and reaching out and meeting new people. Thanks.
Zbigniew Brzezinski. Zbigniew Brzezinski was counselor for strategic and international studies, professor of American foreign policy at Johns Hopkins, national security advisor to President Jimmy Carter, trustee and founder of the Trilateral Commission, member of the Council on Foreign Relations, international advisor to several major corporations, associate of Henry Kissinger, also worked for Ronald Reagan in intelligence capacities. Co-chairman of the Bush National Security Advisory Task Force in 1988. What a guy. Zbig. Now, if you want to get really, 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 really angry, go buy this book. It's called The Grand Chessboard. American Primacy and its Geostrategic Objectives. Written by Zbigniew Brzezinski in 1997. I'm going to read you some quotes from that book. Page XII, it's the very first words in the book. The last decades of the 20th century has witnessed a tectonic shift in world affairs. For the first time ever, a non-Eurasian power has emerged not only as a key arbiter of Eurasian power relations, but also as the world's paramount power. The defeat and collapse of the Soviet Union was the final step in the rapid ascendance of a Western Hemisphere power, the United States as the sole and indeed the first truly global superpower. Page XII, it's in the preface. But in the meantime, he says, it is imperative that no Eurasian challenger, Eurasia is everything in between roughly east of Germany all the way to the Pacific Ocean, south through the Indian subcontinent, includes the Middle East. It's imperative that no Eurasian challenger, by that he means Russia or China, emerges capable of dominating Eurasia and thus of also challenging America. The formulation of a comprehensive and integrated Eurasian geostrategy is therefore the purpose of this book, Geostrategy, Eurasia. The attitude of the American public toward the external projection of American power has been much more ambivalent. The public supported America's engagement in World War II largely because of the shock effect of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Gets worse. For America, the chief geopolitical prize is Eurasia. Now a non-Eurasian power, that's us, is preeminent in Eurasia, and America's global primacy, isn't that arrogant? America's global primacy is directly dependent on how long and how effectively its preponderance on the Eurasian continent is sustained. What he's saying is that if the U.S. wants to stay top dog, we have to control Eurasia. America's withdrawal from the world, or because of the sudden emergence of a successful rival, would produce massive international stability. It would prompt global anarchy. You know what he's saying there? Yeah, a little global anarchy would probably be a damn good thing right now. What he's saying there is, if we don't control the world by whatever means necessary, the world's going to be miserable. He didn't ask my opinion. Did he ask yours? Okay. In that context, how America manages Eurasia, do we manage people around the world? Is that our job? Is critical. Eurasia is the globe's largest continent and is geopolitically axial. A power that dominates Eurasia would control two of the world's three most advanced and economically productive regions. A mere glance at the map also suggests that control over Eurasia would almost automatically entail Africa's subordination, rendering the Western Hemisphere and Oceania, that's Australia, for all of you non-academics, geopolitically peripheral to the world's central continent. About 75% of the world's people live in Eurasia, and most of the world's physical wealth is there as well, both in its enterprises and underneath its soil. Eurasia accounts for 60% of the world's GNP and three-fourths of the world's known energy resources. Two basic steps are thus required. First, to identify the geostrategically dynamic Eurasian states that have the power to cause a potentially important shift in the international distribution of power, and to decipher the central external goals of their respective political elites and the likely consequences of their seeking to attain them. Second, to formulate specific U.S. policies to offset, co-opt, and or control the above. The man is talking about co-opting, controlling, managing, subverting nations and peoples and economies. To put it in a terminology that harkens back to the more brutal age of ancient empires, the three grand imperatives of imperial geostrategy are to prevent collusion and maintain security dependence among the vassals, to keep tributaries pliant and protected, and to keep the barbarians from coming together. That's on page 40. I'm telling you, you got to buy the book.
The outro music today is my band Stellamorphic's song Outer Core, played live at the Thorn Lounge. Hope you enjoy it.
We'll chaos.